Now this is the Yossi Kedesh Siman Chof, which the Alter Rebbe wrote Korav Manas Talkusa. He wrote right before he passed away. It's interesting because you have some of the most important chidushim in Chassidus Chabad, and this is Yossi Kedesh, Mamish. This Yossi Kedesh has one nekuda. It's the nekuda of Yesh Me'ayin. Okay, the nekuda of this Yossi Kedesh is there's a kasha. The kasha says a mashpia cannot give a makabel what the mashpia does not have himself, right? So we have a ruchnizdika world that's bottled to the Eibishter. How could it create a world which is not bottled to the Eibishter? Since that ruchnizdika world is bottled to the Eibishter, it recognizes and it's humble in front of the Eibishter. How can you give a world something you don't have? Now, chacha filu afal pi that's bottled to the Eibishter is a maila, and not built to the Eibush is a chasar that it's sheker, right? In other words, the idea of Yeshus. What does Yeshus mean? That I exist in an independent way. It's a lie. The truth is Eibush is only balabos. But the Alter Rebbe argues that even a chasarin like Yeshus has to have a mocker. And the shaila is, how could this Gashmius world exist? This Gashmius world exists, and the nature of it is a youth that it's a yesh. Yesh doesn't only mean that it exists. It takes up time and takes up space. Yesh means that the nature of its existence is that it's independent. This world screams, nobody made me. I made myself. I always was. Or other kinds of shtusim, which are sheker. It's not true. But the Alter Rebbe is wondering, where did this world get its Yeshus from? And the answer that the Rebbe is going to give is that the Yeshus of Elam Hazeh comes directly from the Yeshus of Atzmas himself. Hashem is a Yesh. What does that mean, Hashem is a Yesh? Hashem is independent. Hashem needs nobody. Hashem needs nothing. This Gashmius world gets its Yeshus from the Yeshus of the Eibush. Chacha Afilu, the Eibush is called Yesh Amiti, the true Yesh. In other words, he's truly independent. And our Yeshus is sheker. Do you understand? So the shaila becomes, how does the Yeshus exist? Now the Rebbe answers, the Yeshus comes from the Yeshus of the Eibush. And here's the problem. Hashem is the truth. This world is sheker. The Yeshus, the fact that this world fills them in the sheker. The Eibishter creates a Seder Ishtalshus. A Seder Ishtalshus means a chain reaction of worlds, right? There's Lifnei Atzimtzum, there's Ilmatzein Sof, there's Atzilus, there's Bia, Atil Asiyah. All of these worlds don't have Yeshus. All these worlds are bottled to the Eibishter. So the shaila becomes, if all of these worlds are bottled to the Eibishter, how could they give us Yeshus if they don't have it? So the answer is, it comes from the Eibishter. But it has to pass through Ishtalshalus. The Yeshus has to pass through Ishtalshalus. How does the Yeshus pass through Ishtalshalus when in the Ishtalshalus itself you don't see the Yeshus? That's what this Yossi Kedesh is going to be about. And this Yossi Kedesh has two nekudas. Has 2 points. The first point is going to be, the first half of the Yossi Kedesh, till Kuf Lamed Amud Beis, is going to be that the fact that the Yeshus in this world has to do with the principle of Oir. And from Kuf Lamed Amud Beis till almost the end of the Yossi Kedesh, the Alter Rebbe is going to say that the reason, the way Yeshus happens has to do with Malchus. You'll see, we'll talk both Nekudas. And mamish, the last 10 lines, Alter Rebbe is going to explain why we make such a big deal, the last 5 lines, out of mitzvahs ma'asos in this world. Why is it the most important thing is Gashmias? Why? Because the Yeshus of Gashmias comes from the Yeshus of Atzmas himself, the Eibishter himself. Even though the Yeshus of the Eibishter himself was the only truth. And the Yeshus of Gashmias is the biggest lie. But we say that there's a connection between what's called in Hasidus Yesh HaNivra, the Yeshus of this physical creation, and Yesh HaMiti, the true ego of the Eibishter. You understand? So everything in between would be called Ayin, and there's 2 Madregas of Ayin. The Har Madrega would be called Ayin of Yesh HaMiti, the Low Madrega would be called the Ayin of Yesh HaNivra. The Yeshus of this world, which is the biggest lie, it's the biggest sheker, has a root in the Yeshus of the Eibishter himself, and through Torah and Mitzvahs we reveal the Eibishter's Yeshus and the Yeshus of Gashmias. That's mamish the last 5 lines of the Yossi Kedesh. So without any further ado, let us begin. Okay, now remember, the point of this Yossi Kedesh is to explain how there could be. So now, again, yeah, well, it's still not the same noise. The nekuda is, I have to tell you this before we start. It'll save us a lot of time. The nekuda is that the Alter Rebbe is going to be mechadesh in Tanya A Chiddush Nifla. This Yossi Kiddush is Kula Chiddush. I mean, it's an unbelievable Yossi Kiddush. But there's one Iker Chiddush. And that is the following. There's a principle in Kabbalah that says, Ein Me'ein Amoyer. Everybody knows that Kabbalah is about godliness. Getlechkeit, right? Alakus, Getlechkeit, is Ein Sof. Ein Sof is not the Eibishter. Chas v'sholom. Ein Sof is the light of the Eibishter. The Gili of the Eibishter. Right? The Oyer. And we say, Oyer Me'ein Amoyer. Oyer Me'ein Amoyer means that Oyer has in it every single quality of the Moyer. Right? The Eibishter is infinite. Eibishter can do whatever he wants. He's a Kech Bilti Bal Tachlis, like it says in the Gimel Ikrim. The Oyer has every quality, except for one. If the mile of the Eibishter is that nobody created him, the whole mile of the Oyer is that it's not a Metzias B'Snei B'Chlal. It's exactly the opposite. The whole truth of the Eibishter is that he's called Metziusim Atzmusim, nobody made him. And the whole mile of the Oyer is that his whole Metzias is the Eibishter, not itself. So therefore the Eibishter is called Yesh, he's independent. And the light is called Ayin. Compared to the Eibishter, it's nothing. Right? So Oyer Me'ein Amoyer means Oyer has every quality of the Eibishter except for one very serious quality. It doesn't have Yeshus. The Alter Rebbe is Mechadish. Since we say Oyer Me'ein Amoyer, the light has Yeshus too. But it's Behelim. The light has the quality of Yeshus, only that it's hidden. And when the time and the circumstance comes, the Oyer could reveal this mile of Yeshus, and that's how Yesh Me'ayin happens. You hear? In other words, the first half of this Igeres HaKedesh, till Kuf Lamed Amud Beis, is making this point that I just made. That Oyer has every quality of the Moyer, including the Yeshus. Even though the whole idea of Oyer, like I said, if you would have a conversation with Oyer himself, you had one thing to say, you say it over and over and over again until you'd be bored. Meet my source. That's it. Oyer's no Metzias. But because it's a perfect Me'ein Amoyer, it has the quality of Yeshus, even though when the Oyer is not Be'ez Galos. And therefore, Oyer Me'ein Amoyer, since it's carrying the quality of Yeshus, eventually, when it gets to the bottom of the Hishtalshlus, to the creation of the lowest world, the Oyer reveals this possibility of Yeshus to create the Yeshus for love. It can't. If it can't have bittul and not bittul at the same time. The whole idea of it is bittul. So how can it be Yeshus? You understand? So the Alter Rebbe begins against the Kiddush Chaf as follows: Iyu v'chayei echad, iyu v'gamei echad. It says in Tikkun Yisrael that the Eibishter is one with his light, and the Eibishter is one with his vessels. Okay? By Pashtus, this goes on Atzilus. Okay? Atzilus is a godly world. It's a godly world means to say, to give you a very, very good example. Yeah, it says later on in Tanya, and it's brought in the Shemim also, that a malach is a nivra. A malach is a creation like anything else. Be'ez hashlichus, when a malach is doing a shlichus, he's called Hashem. Like you had in last week's Pasha, Shev Oshav Alecha Ke'ez Chaya. The malach says to Avraham Avinu, I'm going to come back in a year. And this goes on the Eibishter, right? So a malach is only getlachkeit, is only comes to the Eibishter Be'ez hashlichus. It's not before and after. Atzilus is different than a malach. Atzilus it's not the pshat that it's sometimes battle the Eibishter. The whole metzias of Atzilus is that reveals the Eibishter. Atzilus is Valakus. Here the Alter Rebbe says the kvetch. He says Pirush. What is the pshat? Hashem and His light are one. Hashem and His vessels are one. The Sfiras the Atzilus Chayei ein ha'eres. The 10 Sfiras of Atzilus that means Chayei, which is the eres. The Gamai and the Gamai means the bones, the kalim, the etzomes. Hein ha'kalim, which are the kalim. Shakun on the lakus, they're all godliness. Masha'en came bebri etzila asiya chuli. Only in Atzilus is it true that the light and the vessels are one with Him, as opposed to Him, yeah. The question becomes, how could you say that Ein Sof chad im Gamai hin ha'kelim? How could you say that Ein Sof is one with the Gamai, which is the Kelim? The vessels are actually limited, because the Beit Chaim says in Kabbalah, and Ein Sof is infinite. So how could you say that Hashem is one with the Kelim? Now I am going to go out on a limb and say something, which I believe. And I think I have a mocker for it, but I'm not sure. And that is that there's two parts to the Kelim, okay? There's Pnimius HaKelim, there's Chitzonius HaKelim. Pnimius HaKelim, this is not a kasha. Because Pnimius HaKelim are called in Chassidus Gavnei HaOyer. The only thing Pnimius HaKelim does to the Oyer is that it reveals it, that's it. So Pnimius HaKelim is not Gvul. Chitzonius HaKelim is Gevul. And the Alter Rebbe's kasha is that from the Lashon of the Tikkun Ezeiah, he's making an assumption that not only do we say that Pnimius HaKelim Mumid Alakus, but we're saying even that Chitzonius HaKelim Mumid Alakus. And his kasha is, okay, the diuk is that we're talking about Chitzonius HaKelim. Chitzonius HaKelim are Mamash Gevul. And the question is, how could you say that Ein Sof is one with Kelim that are Gevul? And the answer is, on the Makavanahi, the answer is, to say that they're called godliness only in one respect. That they should be able to make yesh mayayin, something that should appear to exist in an independent way. And I've told you 100 times, how do you translate the word yesh mayayin? Yesh means I'm independent. And what's the raya that I'm independent? Because if I am dependent, mayayin. What am I dependent? Mayayin is bitmiya. What am I dependent on? So the fact that I exist independently is the raya that have no source. The Eibishter made a world that should deny the Eibishter. Whose fault is it that the world denies the Eibishter? The Eibishter himself. Because the Eibishter made the world in such a fashion that the world should say, Me'ayin, what's my source? Okay? So the Alter Rebbe argues that this idea that Kelim of Atzilas or Alakus is not mean that they're be'etzem Kelim of Alakus, like Pnimius HaKelim. It means they're Kelim of Alakus, Legabe this prat to create Yesh Me'ayin K'mein Ein Sof, and not that the Kelim should create the lower worlds in a chain reaction type way, which is called cause and effect. In other words, Atzilas should create Bria in a way that Bria should be a Yesh, should be categorically separated, should be independent from Atzilas, rather than simply being another Madrega of Ruchnias. Right? In other words, if Atzilas Kelim would create Bria, but then also the Kelim of Bria would also be like Atzilas, just a little bit less. But that's not how it happens. Kelim of Atzilas create Bria in a way of Yesh Me'ayin, independent, and it's in this prat, because of the way it creates Kelim of Bria, that it's called Yesh Me'ayin. It says in Kabbalah from the Ramak, and Moshe Kodaviri in Pandas, Inyan Hishtashas Ila V'Yolo, the idea of Hishtashas, or the chain reaction of worlds of cause and effect, in Kelim of Atzilas. V'chein, over Zehra Kadosh Pashas Bereishis, same said also in Zehar, and for the Alter Rebbe, Hainu B'Hishtashas Asfiris, B'Sfiris Atma, B'Bechinas HaKelim. This is only true in the chain reaction of the Sfiris and the vessels in Atzilas itself. In other words, from Chochma of Atzilas till Bina of Atzilas till Chesed of Atzilas till Gevur of Atzilas. Over here it's not only cause and effect. Shenikra is Belima. All 10 Sfiris are called Belima, but Sefer Yitid, they have no substance. They're totally bottled. In other words, they don't have any yeshus, any self-identity, separateness. Umuhus musak, an essence which can be reached intellectually. Okay? Just like Ein Sof itself. Nobody's thought can grasp Ein Sof because it's infinite. As the Pasuk says, a funny layer, nobody can see the previous of Alakus. Okay? The same is true not just of the Ein Sof, it's true also of Kelim of Atzilas. Kelim of Atzilas are called Belima, they have no substance, have no yeshus. And the Il of Yol is from one Kelim Atzilas to a different Kelim Atzilas. But when you're going from Atzilas to Bria, this is Yesh Me'ayin. And it is in the respect of Yesh Me'ayin that we say Iva Chayechad, Iva Gameyechad to create Yesh Me'ayin. And he continues. Now that we said that Atzilas is Alakus, and even the Kelim of Atzilas are Alakus, and they should not be able to be understood, what about the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu saw Atzilas b'derech Nevuah? It says the Alter Rebbe Nevuahs Moshe Rabbeinu, all of Shalom Vasagos, Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy and his intellectual reach, Hoysam Ipedek Elyon the Netzach Dezah, he was only able to reach the higher portion of Netzach of the Erampen of Atzilas. Ubishtalsos ha'olo. And when the effect comes down, who mukov me'ila, it's surrounded by the cause, or bottled by Matthias Etzli, and it's nullified in its form to it, Kiziv Hashemesh B'Shemesh, like the rays of the sun and the sun. Meshikosav Padas me'aramak. It says in the Padas from the Ramak. So Moshe Rabbeinu reached, so to speak, Netzach, which is a lower Madrega in Atzilas. And through the lower Madrega of Netzach, which Moshe Rabbeinu reached, he was connected to the Madregas, which are taka higher than the lower third of Atzilas, Netzach of Zav Atzilas. Okay, this is Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah. He says, and as a result, he was connected taka to Lakus, which is higher. Okay, but you cannot create from Atzilus b'derech ilav yavol b'riya. And he says, even if you had many tzimtzum. In other words, even if Atzilus would go through 1,000,000 levels, Lo ye'ilu, they would not be effective, they would not help. Li geshem av, to create a dense physical thing, to offer like earth. Meishtalshlos haruchnius, through a chain reaction of spiritual thing. Mesichel medalim, of intellectuals that are removed from a body. Afilu shalom malachim, even on the level of malachim. Only to create, so to speak, the neshama of the animal from the pnei sheir. That's explained in other places. The Alter Rebbe says like this: Hishtalshlos ila v'yolu in Atzilus is bulima. In other words, Atzilus everything is godliness, and therefore in Atzilus there's able to be Hishtalshlos ila v'yolu because none of the spheres have a mitzvah. In the lower world, there could be Hishtalshlos ila v'yolu, let's say from malachim to create other spiritual things. But if you have a cause and effect creation from one spiritual thing to another spiritual thing, it's not going to create a yesh. A gashmizik yesh. To create a yesh, you have to have yesh meyayin. You have to have a dilug. You have to jump. You can't create it step by step through cause and effect. You have to have a jump. Okay? So the Alter Rebbe is saying this jump has to do with the kelim of Atzilus. Our gvul, in creating yesh meyayin and bria, and specifically in creating yesh meyayin and asiyah, it has to have the koyach of the oil ein sof to create yesh meyayin.